I made a promise to you. I'm going to fulfill the promise today. I want to talk to you guys, about something very fundamental. What I'm talking to you guys about today is Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve banking system. And this Federal Reserve banking system is real. It's a subject matter I believe, that a lot of people are not familiar with, but something I believe that most people need to know because once you have basic knowledge about how money works, then you begin to have your own formed opinion, should I put it that way, where you can begin to see money and even your relationship with money gets different because you have a different perspective about how your money should be and how your money should work. So let me know exactly where you're joining me from as I do this live and tag everybody because it's going to be some deep knowledge we're going into. I promise you, you're not going to be disappointed at all today. You won't. I promise you that. So I'm going to take, a minute, but I'm going to go into the full, of this. I want you guys to understand very clearly, the Federal Reserve. Let me know where you're joining. By the way, can you guys hear me? Post for me really quickly. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me check messages here. Let me know if you can hear me, okay? It's live messages. Okay, cool. So, yeah, Spicy, you could hear me. Okay, cool. Appreciate that. So if you can hear me, then we're good to go. Let me know. Let me unload. Let me know where you're joining me from. Everybody, just text me. Let me say, okay, I'm joining you from, this country. We can hear you clearly. Okay, Spicy, I appreciate that. I'm joining you from this. I'm joining you from that. Let me know where you're joining me from as I begin to break down all of this for you. So, first of all, I said it earlier. The federal, I'm going over what we call the Federal Reserve. That's what I'm going over with you guys today. Okay. So Manchester is in the house. I love that. Okay. Oh wow, talking about Manchester, London, I Zoom. Interesting. I was just talking about this because what I'm about to cover with you guys, actually, the history goes all the way back to London, American Revolution, and so on and so forth. But let me get into this. You see, the Federal Reserve is not reserve, and it's not federal. That's correct. And it's not a retail bank you can walk into to do business. Very interesting, right? So even the concept when you hear Federal Reserve, that is this illusion where you think I got a bank I can go to and do business. No, not at all. This is very heavy stuff. And by the way, it was intentionally done that way for you and I to have a perception of it one way, but in reality it's another. So the Federal Reserve banking system, often referred to as the Fed, okay, is the central banking system, of United States of America. Okay, you see, its creation itself of the banking system and the evolution itself of the banking system is as a story behind it. And this story, like I mentioned, you could trace it all the way back to London, the Bank of London, okay, and how all of those things came about. However, though, let me go here to what we call the pre-Federal Reserve era. That's before 1913. You see, before the Federal Reserve, okay, before 1913, before it was established, the U.S. banking system was decentralized, and often unstable. That's exactly how the system was set up here in the United States of America. So things were decentralized, and it was largely very unstable. So if you're going from one part to another part, you need a different currency in order for you to be able to trade. So therefore, you need a middle person to be able to do exchange of goods and services. That's how it was back in those days. Then what happened is this: the country lacked a centralized banking system. So since the Second Bank of United States, that was back in 1816 to 1836. So there was there you go. Techno came from Instagram. Thank you, by the way, Techno Smarts, and thank you for joining. So, literally, the second, sorry, I'm going back. The Second Bank of United States, 1816 to 1836. So it was recharged due to political tension at the time. There's a lot of political opposition, primarily from President Andrew, Jackson. So there was a very tense political situation that was going on, as of that time. Now, here's what happened. There was a key problems. Number one is called the bank runs. Let me explain this to you a little more clearly. The bank runs. Okay, it said small and local banks, they issued their own currencies, but they were backed by gold. That's how they were doing it. But panics will cause people to withdraw their money. Learning to what we call it bank runs. So every time there was a problem, somebody's panic and say no, they'll go to rush to get their money out. So what we realized is that, like any little thing that happened, the bank just didn't have enough liquid. So there was just not enough money. So that was what we call the bank runs, RUNS. But then there was a great panic of 1907. You see, the panic of 1907, one of the worst banking crises, in U.S. history, because in the United States of America, 1907 is permanently recorded in the history of this country as one of the worst era for the banking system. Why? Very simple. You see, there was no central bank to provide what we call liquidity. So major banks, they all had to step in, led by the financier by who today JP Morgan Chase. So JP Morgan, literally, he had to step in. Think about this, to stop the panic. I'm talking about a guy so big, so successful, JP Morgan Chase, that the country had to go to him to bail them out. Just imagine that. How powerful are you? How much money do you have? So the event convinced many that United States of America, the US needed a more formal system, to manage what we call a monetary policy and ensure what we call financial stability. So JP Morgan Chase was the person that everybody went to and said, okay, we need your help. So in 1913, that was the creation of the Federal Reserve. Now, what's the whole purpose of the Federal Reserve? Why was the Federal Reserve created, I just want you guys to understand this. Like I mentioned, the Federal Reserve is not federal, and there's nothing reserved. This is a bunch of very wealthy individuals that really came together, put their money together. But guess what they're doing though? These Federal Reserves are going to be the one lending money to the country. Let me say that one more time. They will lend money to the country. In fact, they will actually fight to print the money for the country. I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine you're running a business and you're in charge of printing cash for the country. What a business. I want to pause and think about that for a second. What a business. How powerful are you? And everybody needs money. The power of money. So the Federal Reserve, in the panic of 1901, where all those issues were all going on, in response to that, by 1907, in response to the panic of 1907 and the great economic crisis, the Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. So in December 23rd, 1913, signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson, who signed it into law, the goal was to create a more flexible and stable monetary and financial system. That was the whole goal of the Federal Reserves. The key objectives was this. Number one, they want to be the lender of the last resort. That was number one. Meaning the Fed could provide emergency funds to banks to prevent bank runs. That was it. So in other words, banks goes to borrow money from the central bank. So imagine you got your local banks wherever you are. You got your regional banks. You got your community banks. You got all kind of banks around you. But the banks then go to another banks to borrow money from another bank. That's the Federal Reserve. So they will be the last resort, to be borrowed money from. The second was the Federal Reserve was created for the currency regulations. In other words, it was designed to standardize and stabilize the US currency, like I mentioned to you, because literally you have different currencies happening all over the place. They needed a centralized place and people were panicking. So they needed a place where it's almost like a go-to centralized location. Then, number three, why the Federal Reserve was created was for the monetary policy. You see, the Fed was given tools to manage the money supply and influence interest rates. I want to pause and think about this for a second. You have, this is crazy. You have a tool. You imagine you're running a business, you control the interest rates. You're running a business, your business controls the interest rates. You know how that affects you and I? The house you live in, the car you drive, I would think about that. So you live in a mansion, how much do you pay for it? You drive a car, how much you pay for it? Do you realize that's how powerful the Federal Reserve is? The Federal Reserve is in a position to dictate, literally, the monetary policy, which means they affect everybody. They are the big shots. They affect everything and everybody. Now, that's the Federal Reserve. Now, imagine if you own the Federal Reserve. Pause and process this with me. You are the Federal Reserve, but let's say you're on the board. You own the Federal Reserve. How powerful are you? How incredibly are you? So think about this for a second, okay? The Federal Reserve was structured with 12 regional banks. That's how in the United States. It was structured with 12 regional banks to reflect the diverse economic interests of different parts of the country. That's how it was structured. And at the top was the Federal Reserve Board, okay? By the way, they are located in Washington, D.C. That's where they're located. So the Federal Reserve Board is the one that controls everything in this case. It's based in Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, which was given overall the overarching authority. That's where it's located. Now, the Great Depression and the Federal Evolution. So between 1920s and 1940s, guys, depression hit. It was ridiculous. During the 1920s, the Fed's role remained relatively limited, primarily serving as what we call lender to the banks. That's it. They would just keep lending banks money. That was their role. However, when the Great Depression hit in 1929, the Fed was criticized for not doing enough to prevent bank failure to combat deflation, because the Fed, they thought the Fed could have done more. Because banks were failing left and right, front and center. Which, by the way, guys, banks are still going to fail, because at the end of this, I want to tell you the problem with handling so much power in the hands of very few people who basically controls the entire planet Earth, because they have so much money, it's ridiculous. So now, the biggest criticism, okay, is this. And if you understand this, how this monetary system works, all of this is going to make a lot of sense to you. The biggest criticism is this, that the Fed, okay, the Fed did not expand the money supply. They did not expand the money supply sufficiently enough, which contributed to the deepening of the depression itself, because they didn't expand that good enough. Another criticism was this: in 1933, the U.S. banking system actually collapsed. It came down to a screeching halt. This is back in 1933. Why? Because you see, guys, the leading president at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was the president of the United States, okay, when everything literally collapsed. So they had to declare a bank holiday. Think about that. And later reform it through what we call a Glass-Steagall Act. That's how he reformed this. The New Deal reforms, okay, that took place was this. So in response to the perceived, failures of the banking system, President Roosevelt, restructured the Fed in the Banking Act of 1935. That's when he restructured all of this. And centralizing more power was given, literally, within the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and he gave them a lot of power, giving the Fed more tools for managing the economy better. That was the whole idea here, okay? That was the idea. But watch this though. When you give so much power, pause and process this with me. You give so much power to a business to control the economy, and you give them even more power. I want to think about this for a second, okay? And process this with me. Who truly, I just process, you and I, let's process this together. You're running a business, you got a lot of power. Your business is money business, and I give you more power. Every time there's an issue, you accumulate more power, but you're in business for profit. Okay, let me say that again. You're in business for profit. So what's your focus? Your focus is what? Profit. So therefore, you think this board of directors have your interest and my interest in mind more than their money? That's debatable. I don't think so, if you ask me. So now, watch this. So once Roosevelt had given the power to them. Now, I want to think about this post World War II. As something we call the Bretton Woods, Bretton, Bretton Woods. That's 1940s to 1971. After a World War II that just took place, the U.S. played a key role in setting up the Bretton Woods system, which established the U.S. dollar. At this point, United States dollar as the world's reserve currency. Let me pause. I want you guys to really understand this. So at the Bretton Woods system, at the Bretton Woods system, United States came up as it was, as the only superpower really after Second World War. So unanimously, they came together and they said, let's make United States dollar the world's reserve currency. So bam, that's called power to United States. Now, you peg that against gold. That was the whole idea. So other currencies were pegged to the dollar. So you had gold, so you had dollar was pegged against gold. Let me say that one more time. You had United States dollar, the dollar was pegged against gold, and then the world's currencies, regardless whatever your currency was pegged against dollar. So it was dollar pegged against gold and your money pegged against dollar. That was the setup, at the Bretton Woods system, which established United States dollar, as the world's reserve currency. Now, the Fed's role expanded as it became more primary manager of the U.S. money. So the role kept getting expanded with a very significant, when I say significant, guys, I'm talking with a significant global influence all over the range, all over the world. However, here's what happened. Economic strains in 1960s and 1970s, including inflationary pressures because of big inflation, and also the eventual collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971 because a president by the name Richard Nixon, United States president, announced the end of the gold standard. So this was back in 1971, I think. That's when he announced that, November 1971. He announced the end of the gold standard, which means, that means gold is no longer backing United States dollar. So gold, gone. That's called the gold standard. So this led to a floating exchange rate, over at the monetary policy. And as you guys can see, as it is now, you see, our dollar, United States dollar, is not backed, literally, till today. Not by gold, it's not backed by anything. It's not backed by oil. The United States dollar is not backed by anything. It's just a paper nowadays. But it's still a very powerful paper. Why? Because it's still the world reserve currency. We have BRICS now coming up, making some noise. But United States dollar is so deep in the reach of all the economies all over the world that it's going to take years upon years to even undo that. But let me continue though, because I need to understand the role of inflation, crisis, Paul Volcker, by 1970 to 1980s. You see, in 1970s, that was a period of high inflation, incredibly high inflation in the country, with rising prices, all over the place, stagnant economic growth. The Fed really struggled tremendously. The Fed was trying to get this under control. So in 1979, a guy by the name Paul Volcker was appointed as the Fed chairman, and he took aggressive steps to bring inflation under control. Primarily by what? He raised interest rates dramatically. That's what he did. So Volcker policies caused a recession in the early 1980s. He really caused a recession. But they succeeded in lowering inflation. They did, marking a turning point on how the Fed approached monetary system. This era solidifies the federal role, the Federal Reserve's role in managing inflation through the control of interest rates. You know what happened there? It was a good thing. It was also a bad thing. Because since then, guess what we do? Now, we have an appetite for printing money. Any given time, we have a problem. Let me take you into the era of Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan and economic stability between 1987 and 2006. So we had a guy by the name Alan Greenspan. So Greenspan succeeded Paul in 1987 and became one of the longest serving Fed chairs. So he was a Federal Reserve chair for the longest. Okay, his tenure coincided with a period of what we call economic growth and very low inflation in the United States. So this was this was often referred to as the era of great moderation. That's what it's called, the era of great moderation. Why? Because Greenspan was credited for his handling of 1987 stock market crash, where the Fed acted very quickly to provide liquidity. They brought money to the table, preventing a total financial collapse. However, however, Greenspan was also criticized for policies that some believe contributed to what we call the dot-com bubbles. The 100% of the late 1990s, and the housing bubbles of the early 2000s. Greenspan is held responsible for that. So what happened between the crisis between 2007 and 2008? The Fed's response. Watch this. So we got something we call the Great Recession. It was tested. The Federal Reserves was tested in new ways that's never been tested before. The crisis that was triggered, okay, by the collapse of the housing market and the widespread failures in the banking system, it caused another major alarm, in the system, because everybody's like, okay, where do we go? What do we do? So now we replaced the Fed with another Fed chairman, a guy by the name Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke went from 2006, I think 2006 to 2014. That's Ben Bernanke. Okay, he became the Fed's chairman. Responded with very unconventional monetary policies. And everybody's like, whoa, what's going on? Here's what he did. Ben Bernanke automatically lowering interest rates is the first move he made. He lowered the interest rates. The Fed cut interest rates to near zero. Why? To stimulate borrowing and to stimulate investments. That's the first thing he did. Secondly, he did something we call quantitative easing. I know some of you have heard that many times. QE, we call it. By the way, what quantitative easing means is the Fed began, buying large amounts of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to what? To inject money into the economy to stabilize the financial market. So we call that quantitative easing. The best way for me to explain this in the language you understand, let's just say, for example, let's say you have a credit card. Let's put it that way, okay? By the way, Angela, Techno, all of you guys, I'm welcoming every one of you guys, okay? So let's say, for example, you have something we call, what am I losing? Quantitative easing. Say you have a credit card. Say your credit card gave you a reach of, say, $10,000. Let me just say that for analysis purposes. And they said to you, your credit card company said to you, you know what? Just based on the current economic crisis we got going on, I'm going to help you. I will take your $21,000 to a $30,000. Really? Yes, we'll call that quantitative easing. That's what we'll call that. Now, let's do the reverse. Let's say the economic crisis was so tough, and they call you and say, let's say your credit card, we're going to reduce your credit card tremendously. What do you mean? I'm going to cut your credit card from $10,000. I'm going to drop your credit card to $5,000. Whoa, why? That's called what? Quantitative tightening. So one is called quantitative easing. The other one is called quantitative tightening. The example I just gave you right there is the simplest example to explain that. So Ben Bernanke did what we call quantitative easing. So there's a lot of cash that was injected into the economy to make the economy up and running, so you can borrow, you can buy, you can do all kind of stuff. He also did what we call a bailout. Okay, the federal government provided emergency loans to banks. So a lot of banks were taking in loans left and right, and not even non-banking institutions were also taking in money to prevent collapse. That's exactly what he did. The crisis led to a reform, including what we call the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, which aimed to increase oversight of the financial system and to reduce the risk, of a future crisis. The act also gave the federal government more regulatory power over large financial institutions. That was the era of Ben Bernanke. Then what's happened since then? The modern era from 2010 to 2024 to present. What's going on? Guys, the post-crisis, okay, that we're looking at right now, I'm checking messages here. The post-crisis that we're looking at is the federal government continue to play an important role in managing economic recovery. You have Janet Yellen, okay? Janet Yellen came in 2014 to 2018, followed Bernanke, and she focused on gradually raising interest rates in the economic, for economic recovery. So he started raising the interest rates. That's again Yellen. During the COVID era, pandemic of 2020, the Fed, under a new person called Jerome Powell, okay, who by the way we still have Jerome Powell to today, 2018 to the present, Jerome Powell. He also played a very, very critical role. Jerome Powell played a major role. What did he do? He took aggressive rate cuts to near zero during COVID, so he can stimulate you and I buying things, because again, as you can tell, again, a lot of stuff was going on. So, Jerome Powell wanted to stimulate the economy, so he cuts interest rates. So you are able to buy things and almost pay near zero interest. So you're able to use other people's money, which is a beautiful thing, by the way. That stimulated the economy for COVID. And then Jerome Powell also expanded quantitative easing, I explained to you guys earlier, to stabilize the market, so more money coming in. The third thing he did, is direct lending programs. So rather than having to go to all these major third parties, the Fed introduced emergency lending facilities to support businesses, municipalities, and financial markets. So he took, again, a radically different approach that he took to resolve the economy. So what are the key functions of the Federal Reserve today? What are the key functions of the Federal Reserve today? Remember what I said. The Federal Reserve is not reserve, and it's not federal, and it's not the arm of the government at all. It's actually privately owned by the very wealthy people. That's the Federal Reserve for you. The key functions of the Federal Reserve today, number one is monetary policy. That's number one. So it's adjusting interest rates and controlling the money supply to manage inflation and promote maximum employment. So their role is massive. Their role is big. They're still pushing. They're pulling. They're not quieting down. They're strong. Okay. Number two, banking supervision. So the Federal Reserve, they are again heavily interested in regulating and supervising member banks to ensure financial stability. Because who lends money to the banks? They do. Remember, it's privately owned. Remember, it's other people's money. Remember, they're in for profit. They set the risk for interest. They have so much power, it's ridiculous. Part of the families that own the Federal Reserve is the Rothschild. The Rothschild actually have so much money. He had them in France, in America, in Germany. Guys, he had London. He's got 4 or 5 children. He positioned his children in different parts of Europe. Guys, this is genius to me. But essentially, I don't want to lend money to you. You're only one person. I want to lend money to governments. Because if I lend money to government, it's backed by my collateral. The collateral is what? The collateral is taxes. Because the government of the world collect taxes. So therefore, it's a strong collateral. Guys, this is playing ball at the highest level. This is not the kind of a guy that's messing with small money. This guy's messing with big money. Big money. If you hear the Rothschild, have respect for them. They are one of the members that owns. So by the way, the Vanderbilt, during Vanderbilt's era, oh my God, Vanderbilt is the richest person in the world. Really? Guess where he got his money from? Yeah, you heard me right. They still all came from who? From the reserve. Where's the reserve coming from? Your Rothschild. It's ridiculous stuff. Okay? All the people you guys know, JP Morgan Chase. Who else do you want to talk about? Okay? You want to talk about, guys, give me anybody. Rockefeller. Oh my God, it's incredible. They all still come from where? Because all these rich people, they do investments, and the money comes from where? From banks, from the government, etc. Guess who controls the banks? The Feds. Who controls the Feds? The board. Who owns the board? Peel the layer, peel the onion, and it will take you back home. It's powerful stuff, guys. So, monetary policy, the Fed Reserve, also, they do banking supervision today. The third thing they do, financial services. They act as a banker for the US government. You know how you go to the banker and say, yeah, that's my banker, that's my this. The Federal Reserve act as the banker for the US government, the most powerful government in the world. That is correct. Providing services to what we call depository institutions. That's what they do. So they bring the money forth, and it's all on them. So I want you to imagine the level of gravitas that is gone. And of course, the last function is they are also lender of last resort. You know what lender of last resort means? Lender of last resort means they're providing liquidity to banks during times of financial stress. So if there's a tough financial stress going on, tough issue going on, they have to go to the Federal Reserve to borrow money from them. Let me bring this to a close conclusion of this, because there's a lot of stuff I cover with you guys today with the Federal Reserve. It's a lot. It's a lot. You see, why am I talking about this today? I want you to understand your relationship with money needs to start improving tremendously. Because the money you know and the money you and I spend so much energy on, believe it or not, it's just a means of exchange. That means of exchange, you need to know the history behind it. You need to know who really owns those money, because, guys, we're just custodian. Oh, I'm a millionaire. Great. You're just a custodian. No, I'm a billionaire. Great. You're just a custodian. The guys, the big guys, the really big guys who are controlling this is a big boy, big girl type territory here. Very, very, very rare place to be. But let me bring it to a conclusion for you. The Federal Reserve has evolved significantly. It has. The Federal Reserve today, okay, is evolved to the point, like when you go back to 1913 and you look at the Federal Reserve that controls money. By the way, every country now have their own. There's the central bank of this country, the central bank of that country, the central bank of this country. So every banks have their own central banks right now. I mean, and a lot of them, okay? A lot of them, truly, no joke, okay? A lot of them, as we speak, a lot of them, they follow the same playbook. So it's not just United States. They're all borrowed from the United States, just like the United States borrowed from England. So, initially, they came in to stabilize the banking system. That's what they came in for, initially. And of course, now, everything has changed, okay? You guys follow me? Everything has completely changed. It plays a critical role in managing the entire US economy. And through monetary policy, its actions are closely watched and monitored, both domestically and internationally, because they have so much impact all across the world. And they also create what we call a major influence. Everything from inflation, even they determine your job. Yes, the house you live in, the car that you drive, all of those things are all determined by the Feds. I don't care which country you're in, since most countries of the world's money are pegged against United States dollar. It doesn't matter which country you're in. Everything's impacted by the Federal Reserve. So, having said that, folks, I hope I brought you a lot of knowledge today on how the Federal Reserve System works. And now you know clearly the Federal Reserve is not reserve. Okay? And and it's not federal, and it's not owned by the government. In fact, contrary, it's a run for profit owned by individuals who lend money to the government, set up a monetary policy, supervise the banks, lend money as a last resort, and also provide financial services. That's exactly what they are. By the way, if you enjoy my content today, if you like what you're watching today, I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, okay? I'll post this so you can go back and watch this all over again. But this is some deep knowledge that I know you're going to love, you're going to appreciate if you get a pen and paper and go back and rewatch this again and again and again until everything makes sense to you, and do your own, research, so that you can tighten up the game to get really good at financial literacy. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel. I look forward to catching up with you guys tomorrow. Bye now.